Okay, so I want to do a little bit of a talk about materials and some of the nuances of applying materials to objects. I'm just going to use the monkey head for this because it'll allow me to demonstrate a couple of things that maybe your models may not have, and um, show you some workarounds for how you can get those qualities in your own models, or yeah, basically so that you can map materials onto a surface that doesn't have these specific attributes. So what I'm talking about here is if I select my monkey head here, and then I'm going to use this section here. Actually, I'll just switch this over to the UV editor. So if I select my monkey head here, you can see that in my UV editor, which is this little thing here, I have this kind of like layout, right? All of the polygons are laid out flat in like this net. So these are what are called your UVs, and these are this is your all your polygons laid out flat in a square that is going to be scaled to the size of any texture input you have in here. Now, these are, you kind of have to make these. You can generate UVs by going to UV unwrap or UV smart project and then hitting OK, and it'll create UVs for you. That'll be generally fine, but you'll notice that you have like seams all around your model where bits of the image don't line up properly. So that's kind of one of the pitfalls of automatically generating UVs. So I'll just go back because these are probably the best UVs to be using. Now there are ways of just avoiding dealing with UVs entirely, but it's just a good idea to understand like why and how a flat image is being mapped to the surface of a 3D model. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of just what UVs are and why and how like the texture mapping process takes place. I'll come back to those in a second. I'll just jump back into the shader editor, and we'll set up a new material by clicking on new up here. We'll just set up a principled BSDF, and I'm going to import some just a simple texture. So one of the nice things you can do for the texturing tools is go into your preferences, add-ons, and search for an add-on called Node Wrangler, and just turn that on. So that'll allow you to generate some handy nodes just with a shortcut. So yeah, let me just add in. We go Shift A. Look for a texture. We'll bring in an image texture, and I'll just open an image texture that I have. So here's a metal texture. I demoed this specific one in the lecture, but you'll find it maps really nicely onto the monkey head, and that is because if we switch back to our UV editor, and we just jump into edit mode, we can see that that texture is coming in here in this square UV view, and you can see exactly where certain faces are being mapped, or having their surface mapped to the image texture. I'll just turn off these bloody overlays. There we go. Yeah, you can see that, but you can also probably see somewhere that we will have like a big seam, especially where like this area here at the top of the head or at the back of the eyes here. You can see, or you should be able to see here, like that we're getting the seam where the textures don't align correctly, or the texture itself doesn't kind of align with it's not a continuous kind of texture, and that's, I guess, one of the things you run into when you're doing texturing, is that sometimes you're going to have these odd areas, and you can either be creative about how you hide them, or find other ways of generating your coordinates. So what do I mean by find other ways of generating your coordinates? Well, we can, if we select this and we add in a texture, Shift AS, texture coordinate node, we can plug any of these texture coordinates into our into the vector input, this one here, of our image texture, or for that matter, any of the procedural textures that we can generate here in the texture, in the add texture section. And we can use a different kind of texture space. So right now we're using the UV texture space. So when we hook that up, we shouldn't have anything different. We can still see the seam here along the back here, but otherwise everything should be similar. If we have a complex object that doesn't have good UVs, which is quite likely with the way we've been generating our objects, we can use we could probably use generated UVs. Now the generated UVs may or may not work depending on how your how your object is set up. But you can play around with a few of these different texture modes to try and find a texturing setting or a coordinate setting that will allow you to generate proper texture coordinates. Now I actually think that I might be missing a texturing node in here. If I look for mapping, might be this one. Let's see what Node Wrangler creates for us. So if we that's right. So if we select this node and hit Control T, we automatically get a UV coordinates or a texture coordinates and a mapping node generated. So if we now chuck that generated texture into the mapping node, we might find that we can rotate and find a better angle for our textures, so that from whichever angle we're kind of viewing it at, or we're kind of finding a more appropriate way of pushing or pulling that texture along that surface. It can get a little bit trippy, so probably it's just the rotation tools that you're wanting to work with. But generally you might be able to find, if you don't want to go through and UV unwrap your object, although that is a pretty decent way of doing it, just using the auto UVs and then using the UV texturing and just setting all these to 0. That can be a pretty good way of doing things, is just by using the generated coordinates or object coordinates and messing around with these rotations until you find something that works for your particular shot or your particular camera angle. But the option is always there of jumping into edit mode, selecting all of your geometry, going to UV, Smart UV project, and then just leaving everything at default and hitting OK. And then you'll find that your UVs are pretty good, but you'll have some seams happening. So maybe trying to find a way of configuring your UVs or generating those UVs, to avoid some of these seams. But I'm going to go back to the default UVs. For the monkey head, so that we can kind of move on a little bit and explore texturing a little bit more. So while we have these mapping nodes, we can start to use them for multiple images. So if I just hit Shift D here a couple of times, we're going to add in the other components of this texture here. Yeah, cool. So we'll take our metalness map. We will take our normal map, and we'll Shift D that again and just use the open instead of deleting it, and use the roughness map. So I'll just reorder these. And what we can do is, just to make our lives easier, is just take that vector input from our mapping node chuck it into all of these nodes. And if these nodes become a little bit in the way, you can just use this arrow here to shut them down so that they're a little bit smaller. Just make sure to plug them in first. There we go. And then you can take the color outputs from that. So this is our roughness map, so this can go into our roughness. This is our metalness map, so this can go into our metallic slider. And this is our normal map, so we'll just need a normal, Shift S, a normal map node. So if you're using black and white, it'll be a bump map node, and if you're using a proper normal map, you'll need a normal map node. And we can just pop that into color here, and this into our normal map here. And so this will give us this kind of scratchy looking metal here. It's a little bit too shiny for my liking. So again, we can go in, as I showed you in the lecture, we can go in and start to edit or play around with the distribution of the colors of the normal map. So if we want to make things a little bit less glossy, we need to make sure that we're basically using a roughness level of higher than 0. So right now we have black as our like roughness, as like complete gloss. So we might just need to select that, go into the color, and just raise that value a little bit so that we can matte up that surface a little bit. So this is just affecting the image that's coming in. Yeah, should be kind of creating, yeah, we can see here if we get in nice and close, it should be creating some variation across the surface. Not a lot. It's more obvious around these areas where there's some kind of scuffing. But yeah, we can go into all of these images and increase the intensity or increase the contrast. Maybe we're increasing or decreasing the strength of the normal map just to get some some more or less intense scratches here. And we can also go in for our metal, and maybe we add in a hue saturation here, and we start to actually tweak the color of our metal to make it just slightly less slightly less intense, or more intense, or we can kind of shift the color space very, very slightly to get a different quality of metal. Cool. So that's one way of doing things. You can see that once I jump back into my camera, the depth of field kind of takes care of the nasty way that Eevee tends to resolve glossiness. You kind of get this noise here, but if that is becoming a problem, you can just crank up the samples until you don't see it anymore. In fact, Eevee renders so quickly that you might want to put your render samples up to something like 256 and the viewport samples up to 128 or something, just so that you can see over time that kind of noisiness you get around the edges of your the metal should resolve a little bit quicker. Oh, so there's an example of me forgetting to turn off the render flag on my on the plant that I hid earlier. Actually kind of cool, but yeah, so the reason I was seeing that plant in there is because I turned it off in the viewport, but I did not turn off this render flag here. So if you're getting stuff showing up in your renders that shouldn't be there, just make sure that the render flag, which is this little camera icon, of course you can't see that on the stream. Hang on, let me just pull this across a little bit. Yeah, so you get these kind of issues with the render flags here that will mean that some things are showing in your viewport when maybe in your renders when maybe they shouldn't be.